You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. This is Forhad. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe. I want to deviate a little bit from the standard opening of the podcast and take a moment to recognize my mom. As I alluded to during the last episode of Jerry Hart, we lost our mom this past Memorial Day. Needless to say, it is awful. Anyone that has gone through it knows it's probably one of the worst things you could go through. I wanted to talk about her just a little bit before we got into the episode. So, some of you know this, some of you do not, but my mom raised myself and my three siblings essentially on her own for the past 30 years, even though we were adults for much of that. You know how that goes. You're always a child to your mother. And we were children when my dad first passed away at a very young age. And, she placed great value on family, on education, on just being decent human beings. And while we didn't have a lot after my dad passed away, my mom actually she made us feel like we were never in need of anything. In fact, looking back on it, I know that we were actually privileged. So not so much from a monetary sense, but more so that we believed that we could do and be anything that we wanted to be. She never let us feel any other way. And again, looking back on it, it's just such a privilege. So I just wanted to thank you, Mom, for everything that you did for us. We'll try to do our best to follow the path you set for us and guide our children in the same direction. I love you very much. Thank you to everyone who called, sent messages, letters, flowers, and fruit baskets. Trust me, we needed it. So I appreciate my guest letting me take a little bit of an interlude, and it's an amazing guest that we have, my friend and former colleague, Mike Martin. How are you, Mike?
It's a pleasure to be here, and my condolences on the passing of your mother. As I told you at the time, she did a wonderful job raising you under such circumstances, and just the light of the love that comes through you and your siblings is something that is unmatched.
I appreciate it, Mike, and I appreciate you saying that. Each time I talk about it a little bit more, it's sort of my grieving process. So thank you. So Mike and I actually met at Guardsmark. Like myself, Mike joined the security industry at a pretty young age, the private security industry at a pretty young age when it was very, very different from how it is today. In fact, Mike was one of the very young team members at Guardsmark who paved the way for people like myself and others. Even though we have not worked together really since 2006, when I say work together, I mean work for the same company. We've always remained close. So, does that sum it up right, Mike?
Yeah, I was one of the first young ones through the door, I guess, and got the scars through it, and the ones that came before me or after me benefited from some of those scars.
No doubt, for sure. So, for those audience members that don't know you as well, would you mind talking a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a suburb of Detroit, and unfortunately, I learned to become a hometown fan for my Tigers, Lions, Pistons, and Red Wings. The highs and lows of a sports fan, I could say I definitely experienced. And going through a period now where they're all in a rebuild, so I can focus more on work because there's not much going on in those areas right now. Um, but as I went through school, I worked as a lifeguard actually, so that might have been an interesting precursor about what my future might hold with me. But I worked as a lifeguard through my high school and college years for what was the largest indoor outdoor pool in the nation. in the city of Warren, which was the north suburb of Detroit. When I graduated high school, I knew that I wanted to go to Michigan State University. I went there and enrolled in their criminal justice program. It was a great experience, and because of just great mentors from both the grad advisors and the professors there, and a lot of practitioners, I was encouraged to kind of join ASIS as a student member. And through ASIS, I put together a thesis on my internships, which were done with the Department of Aerospace and Defense on at the time, which was software theft, and it enabled me to actually get enough money to go and attend our overseas program. And so my entire senior year at Michigan State was overseas, and I attended Cambridge University in England. And the program included enrolling in the Bromsville Police Training Staff College. And also, while I was overseas, I interned for the same company that I did the ASIS scholarship paper for, and then went to work at Stoke-on-Trent as another part of the internship while I was out there.
So that's sort of like the foundation. That's the early parts of getting introduced really into the security business, right? Like, was it something you were aspiring to, or was it like law enforcement, or like was private security in the mix?
Yeah, so straight out of college, I applied to numerous federal agencies, but a lot of them at that time, it was 1992. You had a lot of, because of the post-Gulf War experience, you had a lot of the military people coming out because they were riffing a lot of the military. So a lot of the three-letter agencies were requiring 5 years of experience, and I didn't have that yet. And to go back to a bit, that when I did the internship for the defense industry, we were looking at software theft, which was the primary, reason for the study that I was doing. But
Hmm.
it was an exposure to, the corporate world for the first time, where I was thinking, okay, we're trying to catch, someone breaking the law by using, software that's unlicensed, right? And when I went to some of the meetings to debrief them on, my findings and that, they were asking, well, could you tell if somebody had not just the approved software, but could you see if they had, software like gaming software and things like that? And it kind of opened my eyes. They didn't want so much, and part of it was they wanted to be in compliance with the software regulations, but they also wanted to see, were there engineers that are, making high dollar amounts in those days, stealing, quote unquote, stealing time by playing games or doing other things, on company equipment. So that was
Right.
kind of an exposure that I didn't expect. But back to your question, no, I wasn't thinking security industry per se. I was thinking more federal law enforcement, but there were just so many barriers at that time that every place was asking for that 5 years of experience. So I kind of went to my second tier, which was Guardsmark actually recruits at Michigan State University. And there was a former Secret Service agent by the name of Don Nelson who was up there recruiting. He was also a Michigan State grad from years ago. And, he kind of painted the picture of Guardsmark being very different as the rest of the industry. And I was like, well, maybe that would be a good place for me to get that experience. And there just seemed to be so many, ex federal law enforcement people that were working at Guardsmark. I figured that could be a good place for me to make connections and get that 5 year base experience, at a place like Guardsmark. So, I went in and, called my contacts from the recruiting, and they were able to set something up. And they just had landed a large account in Michigan. It was the merger of Comerica and Manufacturers Bank, and they had a bunch of new positions. And so I went and I think I applied for a couple management positions, but ended up being offered the position as a training supervisor
Hmm.
for what at the time was one of Guardsmark's longest running and largest accounts that they had at the time.
Sure, sure. So tell us a little bit about like Guardsmark. I mean, it was a long time there, and then sort of the transition from there to AUS, and then what you're doing now.
Yeah, I think so. I kind of moved up pretty rapidly. one at the account that I was at. I think in my early 20s, I had about 300 officers reporting to me. And, after a couple of years, I was kind of like, well, there's got to be more. I could do this, forever if I wanted to, I'm sure. But I kind of looked at setting my sights higher up within the organization. And so that's when, while working for Guardsmark, I pursued my MBA. And so, kind of one of the things that makes me pretty unique here in the state of Michigan is I have my undergrad from Michigan State University, but I have my MBA from Michigan. So, um, it was always a good conversation starter. But one of the things that Guardsmark offered me at the time, because I think they were worried that I would get my MBA and and be off and not come back to the company. So they managed to, like, any break that I had, especially the summer breaks, they would send me on things across the country and give me exposure to whether it be a new account startup, a large account being started in the Midwest, or they had office vacancies that needed to be turned around, or they just had issues with clients. So I kind of was able to get my hand in turning around security programs, or running a small office, or helping get large projects started. So it was a way to kind of keep me involved and interested. And it would, made me want to, pursue, staying with the company when I got out. So, during those times, I learned a lot about project management, how to do quick turnarounds, and then seeing firsthand that how management vacancies could lead to both morale and customer issues. So upon getting my MBA, I moved up quickly within Guardsmark. That kind of seemed the catalyst to getting me, and plus the work that I did in the summers during the program, I kind of moved rather quickly to vice president regional manager, where over time I ran the Midwest, Canada, and then eventually the UK for Guardsmark. And I was there about 23 years until we were acquired by Universal. And then they, of course, later merged with Allied into what is now, Allied Universal. And I was there as president of Canada when the Circadian Risk opportunity presented itself. And I worked out a deal with Allied Universal so that I could transition from AUS to Circadian over a 2-year period. And then, so I could really take care of my customers and employees that were at Allied Universal, and be able to go into this kind of exciting new kind of position as CEO of Circadian Risk.
Yep, and we'll get into Circadian a little bit later on in the episode, but just a couple of quick questions. Once you really got rolling with Guardsmark, did you ever consider going back into law enforcement? And B, equally as important, who do you side with on sports? The University of Michigan, Michigan State?
Okay, so I'm prepared for both questions because I could say I have been asked these in the past. So, is 5 years in, I definitely look back and said, hey, I'm kind of getting to that age where I need to make the decision about, am I going to stay and continue to grow with Guardsmark, or do I want to take that step and go into federal law enforcement? And I think, one of the conversations I had on the time was with the president of Guardsmark, Ira Littman, at the time. And when I was saying I was looking at this, I remember him saying, he goes, "You're interviewing people coming out of the positions that you're thinking about going into. They want to be where you are.
Right.
And that kind of struck me, but I was still like, you kind of have that, desire to kind of go and see, well, what kind of an agent would I make in that? But, probably talking, in the relationships I developed with different uh, former agents in that, and when I really kind of weighed things together, I was so much further ahead in my life and where I wanted to be professionally at that point, where it really looked that going into one of the agencies or into law enforcement was going to be a step back for me.
Sure.
And so I didn't have that desire. Tell a kind of side story. Weldon Kennedy, who was former assistant director of the FBI, and I were sent to go talk somebody out of going into federal law enforcement that was with the company. And we're given orders, hey, talk to them about what it's going to be like and everything like that. And when we went out there, Weldon told me, he said, I'm not going to talk the guy out of it. And he goes, I'll talk to him and I'll listen to him. He said, but if they've got the jazz to kind of, freeze federal agent, he goes, they kind of need to get that out of their system,
Right.
if they've really got that, and they got to find out for themselves. And he goes, for some people, it's going to be a life-changing and rewarding experience. And he goes, I would hate to talk them out of it. So I was sworn to secrecy, but since Guardsmark is no longer around, I guess I can tell that story now. But it was just one of those things where it was about doing the right thing, than just what was good for the company.
Sure.
So yeah, the decision for me was, it really felt like no matter where I went, in law enforcement, by the time I would have hit 27, 28, I would have been taking a step back. And Guardsmark definitely had me on a trajectory at that point where I had started attending, the monthly president's meetings, and growing the business in such a way that, hey, there was a lot of rewards to what I was doing, and I had at that time had a great team around me.
Sure. Sure.
Then for the Michigan versus Michigan State one, I think your heart is always with your undergrad, because that's where you do the most growing up, right? You
Sure.
know, the MBA was more a means to an end.
Yep.
But probably more importantly, the fact that my wife is also a Spartan and not a Wolverine, I definitely say go green on game days.
Okay. I got you. Well, I'm sure you'll tick somebody off with your answer. Not just that one, but many of the answers throughout this segment.
But I'm not ticking off the most important person that would
True.
hear the
This is
answer.
true. And you were good, and this is without any preparation, by the way. Mike, there was a miscommunication with sort of the outline that I give to sort of our guests, and Mike didn't get it till about an hour ago, and he had a call in between, and he was still well prepared to answer that question. I'll tell you. The so I thought we would pay a little bit of a tribute to the company that we both got our real
Yeah,
start by asking you a few
yeah,
questions, right? So, what do
yeah.
you remember most about working for Guardsmark?
When all is said and done, and all has been, said and done on the experience there,
Yeah,
I come to the same conclusion. And when I talk to people that were there and on the inside, not just witnessing it from the outside,
yeah,
it's the quality of people we worked with.
no doubt.
And that's from both the employee and the customer standpoint.
Yeah,
I think the best thing about Guardsmark was its ability to attract people who, demanded excellence and were of high character. And it was at every level because they wanted to be associated with something bigger. The industry was not what Guardsmark was putting out there, was not the norm that the industry was known for.
definitely.
And so just the ability to get that high caliber of people in is what I look back and what I think, I remember the most, and the lessons learned from those people.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it's an incredible pedigree in this business anyway. And while I'm a Met fan, this doesn't seem to resonate as well when I use the Mets. So I'm going to use the Yankees. It's like starting your career with the Yankees, you know what I mean, and then going
Yeah.
from there. I agree with you. So on that note, I think I know the answer to this, but who is the most memorable and why?
I'm going to do it in layers, but I first and foremost have to say Ira Littman.
Yeah,
Um, I would say, and I think I alluded to this, is when I said I was one of the first young people through the wall. um, I would definitely categorize it as I received a lot of tough love,
sure,
but I also recognized, that I was very young, and it took some interactions with some of the other people around to let me know, hey, he wouldn't be challenging you like this if he didn't think you could deliver. He's not the type of person that would waste that kind of time on somebody,
sure,
and I kind of, when I would talk to, you know, two-star Army generals and, former heads of the different bureaus that we dealt with. And they say, hey, we all have kind of, took our lumps and learned along the way. You're learning right in here,
sure,
so when people say those things, it meant a lot to me when they said, listen, when you think back about it, he wouldn't have been challenging me like that if he didn't think I'd be able to deliver. And, the kind of the lessons learned,
Yeah.
that I got from him, I find myself incorporating it into my current role with, of course, different delivery methods, right? We all have our own style. But, now when I see somebody that, can't get out of their own way, or that is making mistakes because they're not seeing the bigger picture, I'm able to kind of zero in on that and use some of those methods to kind of correct actions before they become problems.
Sure.
Then so that's first and foremost. The next tier, I would say, the number of people that we met from, those different that
Sure.
came in with well-established careers. I mean, you were sitting in a room next to people that, we had the general that did the rescue from the Black Hawk Down scenario.
Yep.
We had, the Oklahoma City bombing lead investigator,
Yep.
the ones that arrested Ramsey Youssef, just guys that you read about were coming and sitting in meetings, next to you,
Yeah. Yep.
and just being able to learn from them, either, whether it was, through their stories or through, just everyday interaction and seeing their management style.
Yep.
And, and probably the ones like, Dave Zadie and Bill Kinane and Don Pettis. I mentioned Weldon Kennedy earlier, the ones that really truly recognized what they were bringing to the table, but that they needed kind of
Yep.
our tactical experience on how to build a security program.
Yep.
And that's really what made the winning combination. They could knock down the doors. Zadie said this great. He goes, I can get into any room. You got to go in there and tell them how we're going to deliver it, because I don't know how to do that stuff.
Yep. Yep.
And I think that's what created those great customer experiences that, it was really like you're talking about, not an all-star team, because I think all-star teams have their problems, but it's like building, a team like the Yankees, where you've got all these people that know their role, and it's,
Yep.
not everybody trying to be the star, but recognizing what their role is in building this. And
And wanting to win, right? I mean,
yeah,
that there was a winning culture. Like, you wanted to win, and I remember all the things and all the people that you're saying, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. So
yeah, and talk about using those lessons. I say in meetings all the time when I see somebody that isn't as focused on the team win, hey, do you want to be right? You're more concerned with being right than you are the team winning.
right,
And you got
right,
to get beyond that, and you got to see that you're doing it. Steve Jones, one thing that he always said, you got to be honest when you look in the mirror and
yep,
what you see.
yep,
That was something that I learned from Jones, where he was like, listen, I could see the football player in his case, the swimmer, in my case from, 30 years ago when I look in the mirror, but that's not what's staring back at me right now, right? And
yep,
you got to recognize what those are, and you're right. It's about what's in it for the greater good and winning for the team. And
yep,
then I'd be remiss if I didn't say the third level would be just the other employees,
yep,
and not just the peer level.
yep,
I have people that were officers when I first came in. I just did an event at Comerica Park, and from the day I first joined, the officer that first mentored me, showed up for that experience, and it was like we were old friends again. So it really created lifelong friendships out of these shared experiences,
yep,
both good and bad.
yep.
That forged those types of bonds.
Yeah, no, for sure. So so you kind of alluded to it, but what did you learn that you still carry with you today?
I think the thing is that there's nothing impossible, if you're determined to get it done, but it's going to take hard work.
Yeah,
And don't listen to people telling you that something's impossible. There's always a way. It just might not be the easiest way or the least disruptive way to accomplish. And I think during the acquisition with First Universal, there
yeah,
was an insight, and I thought it was a huge compliment that the person had said. They said what they always thought was unique about Guardsmark was that where a lot of the industry was involved with this race to the bottom, and let's low
yep,
bid to get contracts and all that. Guardsmark came out and said, these are our standards. If you're not going to meet them, then we're not going to be interested. And this is how we're going to manage your account. and this is how we're going to screen our people, and this is how we're going to, run our accounts. And if it's not to your liking, then we probably shouldn't be partners. And he said it was nobody else approached the industry that way. This is our program, this is our price. If you don't like it, we're probably shouldn't be bidding on this contract.
Yep. Yep.
And in an industry where there used to being, everyone falling over every time the large bid comes out, we really approached it in a different way. And I think that's what garnered us the good people, the good customers, and all that going forward.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, again, Tony and I, well, as you understand, there were things that we agreed and disagreed with, just like any sort of healthy relationship. The that high um, value, that high level of service, and how you get there is something that we certainly walked away with, and we still practice till this day. And it is something that we certainly learn, and we also learned that, as the top people, the owners, which is what Mr. Lippman was. There's a different perspective, and that perspective wasn't completely clear, when we were working there. But certainly as owners, a lot of the things, while again the delivery maybe could have been different, we understand and empathize with a lot better. And that's actually something we talk about, believe it or not, and I'm sure you do as well. With
Yeah.
yep. And so maybe you could talk about one or two funny moments. And I know we have a lot of them, but uh, anything that stick out in your mind that you'd want to talk about publicly that won't get both of us into trouble somehow?
Yeah, yeah. I think the one that stands out is I was lucky enough to be part of the landing of two of the largest accounts that Guardsmark ever had in service,
Yep.
and and each one of those was its own unique experience. And the thing that sticks out is, I mean, we were down in New York for, I would just say literally months putting together the proposal. I mean, sweating
Hmm.
literally and figuratively, and I'll say literally in a minute, sweating every word that went into that proposal.
Yep.
And we had it all, together. We reviewed, re-reviewed, rewrote, did everything. We finally had it ready to go. And uh, it was going to be um, shipped from Mr. Lippman's residence because they had to get his signature once we were
Hmm.
ready to go. And so we put it all together. We shipped it up with the courier, and I'm standing there. I'll keep names out of it, but I'm standing with the lead sales guy and kind of the person that had the customer relationship,
Yep.
right? And all of a sudden, they noticed that I just turned like ashen, and they go, "What's the issue?" And I go, "We put the signature pages to the side because we thought he was going to be here to sign it. We just sent him out to his residence without these, and they're going to ship in like 15 minutes,
Oh.
you know, and those two guys look at me and they go, well, there's no way we're going to get that there in 15 minutes. So I put it in the full. It was like 3 signature pages, and this is in downtown Manhattan
Hmm.
in August, and it's got to be like 98 degrees,
Yep.
and high humidity, and I'm running from 10 Rock all the way to his residence, which, as you know, is like 5 city blocks away, right?
Yep. Yep.
It might be a little more, but it's not a little less. I know that. And I just started running. Now I'm in full suit. I'm in Guardsmark uniform. I'm in a full suit.
Yep.
I got a tie, and I'm running through with all this shit. And I'm probably, just one block in, probably just point. Now, the good thing is, in any other city, people would be like, "What the hell's going on with this guy?" In
Yeah.
New York, people didn't even bat their eyelid twice. Nobody like, and I'm jostling because people aren't getting out of the way. Typical New York, downtown summer night, right?
Yeah.
And nobody is like, well, isn't that weird? No, it's just, and so I finally made it, and I probably was just dripping with sweat. Probably my suit had probably shrunk, 3 sizes. And I'm there, and the security guy comes down, and I go, these need to get added to the proposal. And he goes, yeah, he noticed these weren't there. And I said, oh, did he know I was coming? He goes, yeah, he talked to the other two guys. I said, oh, does he want to see me? And he goes, no, he hasn't stopped laughing yet.
Oh man,
So
that's
that was one that sticks out, that I can share. There was others, like when we started England, a good friend of mine, Ted Healy,
yeah,
and Bill Kinane, who have both passed recently. That was an experience, into itself, and just, numerous stories about, the planning for that, the meetings over there, launching, the Guardsmark brand on another continent. It was just an incredible experience. But I don't know that I can share a lot of those.
yeah,
And then there are just some customer service foibles. Every company has them, and it kind of, I was like, if this is what we experience, what's going on in the rest of the industry. I had,
yeah,
we were late on an assessment, and by the time we got it there, the company had already, passed their point where it was in need. And just, you know just things that are in the everyday kind of realm, that now when you look back at them, you're like going, geez, I learned from all of these experience. But it
yeah.
was a heck of a time.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Yeah, and it was a special time. I mean, again, you maybe while you're going through it, there are good days and bad days, but looking back on it as a whole, it was pretty amazing. And I think you would agree we were very fortunate to have that affiliation with the company, with the Lippman family, which obviously means a lot to us. And just being alumni of the organization. So I appreciate you kind of going through that, going through a lot of the things, and it really is kind of an interesting thing. And I'm sure many of our former colleagues will listen to this and get a kick out of it. And again, it's one of those sort of side things about like this podcast that's really interesting and memorializing, because it wouldn't otherwise be, right? And so
Yeah.
thanks for going through that. So now let's kind of get into some of the I guess the discussion points of the podcast. So let's talk about the security industry since you started in it over 30 years ago, which is pretty crazy to say out loud, right? So can you talk a little bit about like what it was like when you first started and what you see from a high level perspective as some of the most significant advancements since you started, I guess?
Yeah, I would say, when I came in, and we're talking, early 90s, the industry was still very reactive. It
Hmm.
had very much a, we're prepared to do this if this happens kind
Yep.
of, and it was kind of a product of, the people that were getting into security, post World War II, post Vietnam, and coming in. Very, very reactive, and it still had that kind of, from the proprietary, or from the contract side, still had that kind of rent a cop negative stereotype.
Yep.
You would get that. You went to school for, 6 years, and you still have, and you're in the security industry. Do you need some help? And that contract side was, typified by that low pay and no benefits.
Right.
And so again, it was kind of, like I said, this reactive environment with a lot of negative stereotypes, and for a lot of people, not considered a career. It was either considered a part-time thing, or something you did after you stepped down from your initial career. It wasn't really looked at as a career at the time that I first started.
Sure.
um,
Sure.
what I've seen change, the concept that there is a huge disparity, between contract and proprietary, has really shifted over the years. And quite frankly, I think that we had a lot to do with that. A lot of times we kind of bill ourselves as the alternative to proprietary at Guardsmark.
Yep.
And it wasn't a way that most companies were thinking of it. The contract was there to supplement your proprietary force or something to do if you were forced to change out. But we kind of saw that kind of change, in the evolution of my career at least, to where companies started talking about core business and saying, listen, if you don't put a bolt on our product, then you're not essential. And there are other companies that focus on things essential, and whether that be, security, catering, landscaping, and so forth. There was a time here in Michigan where you could get a job as a maintenance person at Ford, working for Ford with Ford benefits and things like that,
Right.
and you're set. But it came to the point where, hey, if our job is to get cars out the door, who makes that happen, and then who supports us, and those support roles could go to companies that focus on that. So I think,
Sure.
again, that kind of mindset changed where, you can use contract to get those benefits and that. So I think that was a huge change that was markedly different in 1992 as it is today.
Yep.
Um, the other would just, I got to go there. It's just the technology that's
Yep.
changed it. From handheld technology that the officers can use to,
Yep.
the way payroll gets done, the way you can staff, to camera analytics, robotics, and then insights from, all kinds of data that's coming in. So it really went from kind of being this archaic, reactive kind of setting to, this forward thinking, how can we leverage technology in order to get the most out of our security program kind of thing. So that's that. If you went in 1992 saying this is what I'll do, people would have thought you were crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. And it's interesting. I mean, I agree with you on the sort of reactive versus proactive. I think obviously in between all of this is September 11th and the impacts that had,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
obviously other incidents that occurred. So, what do you see as areas that still need work? Like, where do you see areas for improvement still?
So probably the biggest, and I'm actually surprised I still hear this from time to time.
Sure.
It has to do with foreseeability, and you just kind of led into it with what you said there. I thought there were two very defining moments in what was our shared career,
Yeah.
and that was the Columbine shooting
Hmm.
that happened in the late '90s, and then of course September 11th. And I always tell people this, that prior to Columbine, people used to say it'll never happen here, or we don't prepare for that. That's a big city issue, or what have you. And after Columbine, and the discussion that happened after Columbine was it could happen anywhere.
Sure.
And when you had an incident happen, you no longer get the we didn't know this could happen here. You got it was only a matter of time, and people started seeing, the problems that led to it. And so I think that was kind of the first one that woke people up, that it doesn't, and not just
Hmm.
school shootings, but active shooters in general.
Hmm.
You know, they can happen in rural areas. It's not just a big city problem. And I think prior to that, you didn't see a lot of people looking at, that it can happen here, that, oh, we're secluded, or we're rural, or we're in this other type of environment, that they wouldn't need to do that. And then of course 9/11, the fact that there can be a mass casualty attack on
Yep.
US soil. And I think foreseeability changed all that. And I think you were part of those discussions at the time, hey, this is going to get companies more focused on foreseeability. And, we,
Yeah.
we really focused on that. But, I had just in the last year, I was talking to somebody about our product and what it does. And he says, well, I don't really want to do risk assessments, because if I do a risk assessment, you're going to point out vulnerabilities, and that's going to make me liable.
Right.
And it just shot me back 30 years. I can't even believe I can think 30 years back now, but it shot me back to, I thought I heard that for the last time,
Yep.
that somebody would say that documenting vulnerabilities would be something that would increase their liability, especially after what we've been through. And, I still, I look at it as, where do you want to be when an action happens? And I even see the government agencies like CTPAT and the
Hmm.
defense industry are getting away from saying, here is the standard and adhere to the standard.
Hmm.
Do these 500 things and you've met the standard. And
Right.
even those agencies are getting away from that and saying, no, that's not what we want to see. Is show us you have an ability to assess your vulnerabilities.
Yep.
Now, once you identify your vulnerabilities, that you have a program to remediate them, and that you have a program that is in this continual state of assess, analyze, remediate, and reassess, and show us how that works. And again, they're getting more to it's the process, not the, you know, I am the all-encompassing knowing, and here are the 500 things you need to do. Because what's happened? You still have an incident, and now the organization says, "Well, I did everything this agency said to do. Go after
Yeah.
them because they're the one who put it together, right?"
Yep. Yep.
So, so I think the process is what needs to work, and people need to realize that I still can't believe I make the foreseeability argument that, hey, you got to have a program, you got to show that you're doing it, and wouldn't you much rather say, I can't control everything, but here's my plan for getting to all the vulnerabilities that I identified, and here's what I've done, here's what's on the roadmap, and here's what I have to accomplish. Would you rather be there, or would you rather be the one saying, well, I was told not to document my vulnerabilities, so I didn't, you know?
Yep. No, I'll tell you, man. You're saying that, and obviously, like, you gain that deep understanding that you certainly have, uh, from not only learning and adjusting and all that, but being on the wrong side of that, right? And not being prepared, like you're describing, right? And so that really, really, really hits home. And we talk about all the same things, right? We talk about all of the same things, and duty of care, I think,
Yep.
um, is plays a very different role today, right? So having those types of answers, I mean, you may only find out if something really goes wrong, but I certainly would not be want to be on the other side of questioning, if there's a duty of care issue, and that's my answer. I
Yeah.
assume you would agree.
Yeah. And this example, because it's so fresh, I remember it, they laid out their thesis pretty accurately. They said, where I was CSO, I had a general counsel who told me that he didn't want me to do any risk analysis or document any types of vulnerabilities or what we were doing about them.
Yeah.
And he goes, and that came from the chief counsel, the general counsel. And
Right.
he was adamant. He goes, he was saying, so I don't want to be doing this type of risk analysis. And so I kind of let him go, and he talked, and I said, okay, but I've been in this situation with clients before.
Yep.
What do
Yep.
you think happens once an incident happens? And the first thing is, when's the last assessment that you did?
Yep.
What did you find, and what were you doing about it?
Yep.
Those are going to come from any plaintiff's attorney worth their salt, and you're going to get those questions.
Yep.
And let me put you in the situation of having to. Would you rather say, you know, the last assessment I did was within the last 6 months. Here's a list of what I found. Here's the
Yep.
action plan I have to address it. You can see that this particular incident was ranked in on our roadmap to remediate. And we couldn't get to everything by the time this incident happened, but we did these things to try to lessen the impact if it did happen, given the probability and severity of the event. And that's how we did that. You're totally fully defensible, right?
Yep.
And I said, or do you want your answer to be, I
Yeah.
was told not to document anything? And quite frankly, you'll never get the chance to say that,
Hmm.
because quite frankly, that general counsel that told you that will probably say our problem was that we had malfeasance based on the part of the CSO,
Yep.
and we removed him as part of our action following this incident.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
go, I can tell you that that's how I've seen it play out in reality. I've never seen it play out to anyone's advantage that they didn't do a vulnerability assessment and they didn't work on it.
Yep. Yep. No, for sure, man. I think we both agree that like a fundamental component to a strong security program is assessing your risks and determining your needs. And like you alluded to earlier, it's not going to be the same for everyone. You could be a two-person, a one-person organization, right? And have a certain set of risks. And you could be, 100,000 person and have a different set of risks, right? And so
Yep.
each organization, each individual has a different set of risks, really, right? So,
Yep.
um, can you talk about, I guess, the importance of security assessments? Is there anything, I guess, you'd add to it besides what you just said? And what are sort of the general guidelines that you can offer when conducting an assessment?
Well, and I'll say this because you make some great points there. I think first and foremost, and when I kind of, we did assessments at Guardsmark, but it wasn't core, right?
Yep.
But we had the NFL, we had major Fortune 100 to 500 organizations that we did them for.
Hmm.
And one of the things when I came to Circadian, and I was actually pleased to see that Circadian, when they were kind of taking this, disruptor kind of approach, you know, took the biggest objection that we used to get, which used, and you'll remember, either you don't understand my industry,
Hmm.
my company, or how we view risk.
Yep.
And you'd have to fight that each time, saying, no, we've done hundreds of hospital assessments, or we've done thousands of industrial,
Yep.
and the way I kind of approach it now is, you're right. We don't understand fully how your company values risk, and we don't necessarily are experts in your industry all the time. And because of that, we give you the tools to be able to adjust how, what your tolerances are given your specific things. So I think the greatest, the importance of security assessments is that you need to know where you stand on
Hmm.
different scenarios.
Hmm.
But the general guideline is that it needs to be unique to every industry, company, and really assessor that you're using on it.
Yep.
And because of that, you need to distill it down and to be as objective as possible and look across your entire organization. We often see organizations either focused on their high inherent risk locations and, kind of let some of their lesser organization or lesser locations go because they think, oh, I want to focus on LA and
Yep.
Detroit because, those are hot spots, but they don't think of, in rural Alabama, we're the largest employer. And if somebody loses their job, they might be more likely to have, an
Yep.
aggressive assailant, issue in that. And so it's kind of that, you got to have take into account that whole organization, that holistic approach. And, we met with a customer actually in, I think it was in New York, and they had spent a lot of time on, kind of the squeaky wheel, that wanted to be in compliance, that wanted to be, at the forefront, and they spent a lot of time there, and they were really only moving the compliance needle from like 98.1 to 98.5. Whereas if they had, when they looked at the entire organization and saw that if they focused on two other geographies, they could have probably improved the overall organizational risk score markedly had they used some of that time that they spent moving that needle just a little bit to some of
Right.
those areas that really needed it. So you really have to look at it holistically,
Yep.
and that's kind of, you can't just do these point in time ones. Usually, as by the
Yep.
time you get the data, it's already, and the report's compiled, it might be out of date.
Yep. No, no doubt. So when is the right time, and how often should it be done?
Well,
And who
and I
should
think,
be involved? The last part of that is who should be involved.
yeah. So the right time, again, and I'm gonna kind of look at risk is something that you need to be evaluating on a daily basis.
Hmm.
It is ever present and it's dynamic and it's ever changing. And so there's really no right time. I can tell you, like for school assessments, we want to do them when the kids are in so we can see how things actually function. So like the summertime wouldn't be a good time to do those types of assessment. We want to see how the buses run, how, so really it might be specific to different industries about when, but really risk needs to be something that's constantly evaluated. And so the timing is just, as advanced as possible. And one thing that I think they should focus on is not just general assessments, but look at specific scenarios that you're either highly vulnerable to, or if they happen, could be catastrophic for your organization.
Sure.
That's more of an approach that we take as opposed to a good time to do it. And how often I go back to it again, if you could model different scenarios, as often as they come up and as you can think of different things that could either make you vulnerable or if they occurred, be severe to the organization, that's what should direct your planning, not any kind of timetable.
Sure.
And who should be involved? I think it really needs to be a top-down approach, especially with the different scenarios, because we often ask, what are the concerns that keep your CSO and CEO up at night? And so because of that, it needs to be like from the very top to how people interact daily. And there's also a look at when you do these scenarios, it's almost like you know gamifying um, a tabletop as opposed to a traditional assessment.
Yep. Yep. No, I think the dynamic nature of like assessing risk is, I think that's just so important. And I think that like, trying to do that in a manual way becomes very, very complicated,
Yeah.
not only from just practical, but documenting it and stuff like that. And that's where like a firm like yours plays a pretty key role. But let's talk about like benefits of performing like assessments in-house versus maybe using a third party to, like, or I guess pitfalls, of doing, using outside agencies. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I kind of look at it as it depends upon the maturity of the organization's risk department, or how they view risk.
Yep.
We have customers that have assessors on staff that go out and assess their facilities,
Yep.
and they don't use third parties, right? And the biggest hurdle that they had was the same thing you would get if you outsourced it. You're
Yep.
doing point in time assessments the traditional way.
Yep.
You get them in, you have to compile the report. Once
Yep.
the reports are compiled, and I have a specific customer in mind, they've got 60 some odd sites around the globe.
Yep.
They then have to aggregate that data, and it's building a spreadsheet, and it's looking at analysis and statistics, and putting that all together. And I will quote I will quote my customer and saying, and let's face it, a lot of people that are coming out of law enforcement, or went through criminal justice, aren't the greatest statisticians or spreadsheet makers out there. And he said we spent months doing the analysis and preparing the reports for justification, to that. And, we get the assessments done. And that's, where, kind of we come in and say, yeah, but if you think about a new way of capturing that information, and you capture that information digitally, and you're focused on the vulnerabilities, and then going right from the assessment to remediation, then we can build in things to say, okay, given this budget and given these possible remediations and the impact they have upon the organization, we can tell you which ones you would need to do. And that was kind of the breakthrough, with the in-house organizations, because it wasn't so much that they didn't have the resources to conduct, it was the ability to analyze the data,
Yep.
create tasks, and justify the remediation that they needed.
Yep.
From the outsourcing, the pitfalls were kind of like what I said before.
Yep.
Does that assessor have the experience in your industry or with your company or how you want to view risk
Yep.
to be able to give a meaningful analysis of what they're doing? And the ability to not be able to go in and say, here are the things that I want you to look at. They might have kind of a set way in which they perform. And so the way the expectations align with what the output is isn't always synergistic when you outsource that.
Yep.
Um, the the benefit though, because there is this kind of symbiotic relationship that needs to exist between the two, because I have another organization customer that they've got a very small risk department. They don't have people that can go out and perform the assessments on all of their facilities, and have said to us, hey, we've got a plan of how we're gonna assess, and we're gonna hit every location, and we're gonna probably have them. And for different customers, it's either a 3, 4, or 5 year cycle that they're gonna get. By the end of that cycle, they're gonna get to every facility, right?
Yep.
But they recognize we may have an incident. We may have a shooting at one of our facilities, or an aggressive assailant or a workplace violence situation at one of our facilities, and we're going to be calling you and saying, we're going to need assessors to get this assessment done in your tool so that we can look organization wide, and we're going to need to do 400 locations over the next 3 months because this needs to be done yesterday. And so in that case, although that is not their preferred method, they realize that they would not have the resources to do it. But
Sure.
kind of where we're coming from is the way that you're capturing the information can be captured by a third party, and whether it be the objective way in which we're capturing the information, or the ability to have it immediately available for analysis and not have to wait for the report to be written, is something that's appealing to these organizations. So if they do have that, we do have an outsourced group that we can rely on to go in and help them with the problem solve for that. So
Sure.
again, with anything, it depends on your organization and what you can afford to do, and then the one or the other is available to you if you have the need.
Sure. Sure. No, I mean, I think that's all. Like the point about like what happens once it. I mean, that's really where the work begins, right? Once the
Yeah.
analysis, once the assessment is conducted, what happens from there is equally important. I mean, probably more important, right? Because if you get a bunch of data and it's unusable, then what's the point of doing it in the first place?
Yeah, and
So,
that's kind of, again, what we always say is the assessment doesn't end at the completion of the assessment. It
right,
really, the case for risk analysis just begins there.
right, right.
And once you assess, you got to be able to analyze it.
Yep,
Once you analyze it and identify, you got to be able to create tasks to remediate what you found. And then you
yep,
got to have the ability to go out and make this a life cycle process. It has to be something that you're continually evaluating, because the
yep,
risk doesn't go away. And the risk that exists today could change immediately tomorrow. If the president of the United States goes to visit your factory, you've got a completely different risk profile
yep.
on that day than you did in the months leading up to that day. And are
Sure.
you prepared for something like that?
Yep, no doubt. So let's talk about technology and how it can play a role in making assessments easier to conduct and more useful when completed. Can you get into that a little bit in terms of just the
Yeah.
broad overview? Yep.
Yeah, I think the big thing is, and I kind of alluded to it earlier. It's because we can collect data in a way that hasn't been done in this. There have been security assessments for thousands of years, right?
Yep.
And in this country, probably formalized for the last 150 years.
Yep.
But they were all captured point in time. They were all static and done to whatever was going on at that particular time. And a lot of times, by the time the assessment was written, it's already out of date, right?
Yep.
And technology allows you to go out, capture information as it exists today, and put it in the hands for analysis as soon as you're ready, because you're not worried about stylizing report.
Yep.
You're concerned with capturing what is compliant, what is deficient, what is missing, what is needed. And then, given that information, here are recommendations to go. And you need those right away. You don't need them 3 months later.
Yep.
And so technology gives you the ability to get that information quicker, and then to move from awareness, which is the assessment, to action, which is the actual analysis and the beginning of the remediation process. And technology is the only way that you can make it a life cycle process, because if you think about it, and it's been done in other industries, if you can stay, then you get that baseline done, and you
Yep.
start doing assessments and capturing data this way,
Yep.
and you carry it through to remediation. Now I see my risk score was at this level when
Yep.
I did my baseline. Through 6 months of remediation and maybe some changes in my inherent risk, it's now here. And I can show that trend line, going from assessment to assessment, or at any point in time, because now I've made it part of my daily routine. In my opinion, a risk dashboard should be in the GSOC, and as threats change, as that dynamic risk changes, my inherent variables and my remediations change my effective controls, I'm actually able to get insights on literally a daily basis of what, where I stand, and whether it's I want to protect for a hazard, a threat, or a compliance issue. I can be able to model that based on data I have in the system that is up to date and in near real time.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and you can only do that with technology. I can talk till I'm blue in the face to somebody who says they create the greatest spreadsheets and write the greatest reports. And I
Yep.
go, well, you need to listen to some of these CSOs when they're asked, how much of that security assessment did you read? And again, when I talked about Steve Jones, saying you need to look in the mirror and be honest, a lot of those CSOs will tell you they hit the executive summary and begin creating tasks off of that. But do they get to all 300 pages of a report like that? No.
Yep. Speaking of CSOs, the one other quick point that I would make is that, from our perspective, one of the things that we see fairly frequently is that, just like any other department that has needs, right? We need more cameras, we need more people, we need more technology, whatever it is, sort of like papering that need, and sort of using the paper to then vocalize and make a case for what the needs are. I think this helps to do all those things, right? And so I think, when people say I need to do this, well, it's like anything else. You gotta show why, and I think all of these things help with that.
Yeah, with through the technology to be able to create a dashboard and show, here is our risk as it is today.
Yeah.
If we implement these, and you can see which of our locations are most at risk.
Yep.
If we invest X amount of dollars
Yep.
in these remediations, this is what our risk profile will change to.
Yep. Yep.
And to be, again, and having that data back, hard data, not a theory, not a paper,
Yep.
hard data that's been collected recently
Yep.
and can be used to show this is where you will go. And we had, and this kind of ties in again about the technology. We had a client up in Canada that's been using technology for like 2 years to do their assessments and collect all their insights and everything. And then during COVID, they acquired another company in the States, and they had the first thing was, can we modify our assessment to do it for due diligence for an M&A? We're like, yeah, it's just a different type of assessment, right?
Yeah.
And we can capture that data. So they did that, and they were able to get all the U.S. sites done. Now, then they had sites in Mexico, Central America, and South America.
Yeah.
And because it was during COVID, they couldn't get approved to go down there and do that. And,
Yeah.
we kind of went back. Again, this is the beauty of the technology. We said, we have assessors in Mexico, Central and South America that operate in those locations and currently operate there that can capture the same assessment on the same tool and give you the insights that you want. And you'll make the interpretations. They'll collect the data for you. Our founder often does medical. He says, those types of assessors are like who you first talk to when you go into a doctor visit, right? So the doctor doesn't
Yeah.
come in and take your blood pressure and weigh you and ask your recent history and that, and so in this particular case, you know, they had a problem. They have a timetable for due diligence to be done. They have to get it accomplished. They're not being allowed to go into these three areas because of COVID. But
Yeah.
here's a solution. We can capture it because we're using this technology, and we've got people that can capture this data. So, it was kind of like that win-win scenario where we can
Yeah.
help you accomplish this goal, and it's going to be totally transparent because you're still going to get the data to make the analysis and then the recommended remediations, and you're not going to be held up, because you physically can't get yourself into, these locations. So we were able to make that kind of a win for the customer.
Yeah, that's a really really good sort of case study, and kind of, I mean, again, there's so many just practical advancements just because of use of technology in a lot of different areas, but this is certainly no exception. And you know, I really, Mike, I appreciate you. We've talked about this for a little while, and we finally got it off the ground. I really do appreciate you sort of joining me and kind of going down memory lane, talking about the industry, Guardsmark, advances, areas to work on. So I guess the last question I'd have for you is, we usually end the show with takeaways. Is there anything, if you had to say one or two things about what you hope people walk away from this episode, do you have something you'd like to say?
I would say just, I always go back to, foreseeability, and remember, you can never be too safe. You really have to approach risk on that daily basis and say, where do I stand today? And don't get complacent, because complacency is what leads to incidents like this. And, we talked about what situation you would be in. So, you
Sure.
know, develop that process of assess, analyze, remediate, repeat. I
Yeah.
can't stress that enough.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to leave everyone with. And I'm going to say one last thing about just sort of like, I'm sure a lot of our former colleagues and friends will end up listening to this. And I think you would echo this. Thank you for, I guess, your friendship and support, and everything we've been through over many years now. So shout out to Guardsmark, Mr. Lippman, the Lippman family, as well as all of our former colleagues. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so Mike, I appreciate it. To everyone, thank you for tuning in. We're going to leave all of Mike's contact information as well as Circadian's in the description of the podcast. We hope you guys reach out to them. Feel free to reach out to us to get to them as well, and learn more about how this technology could really change the game for you. And till next time, thanks so much, Mike.
No, thank you.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.